Abandoned to her fate in a wild desert, Lali, a brave Apache woman, faces the threat of wolves and utter solitude. Only Rodrigo, a relentless and determined cowboy, can save her. Amid mortal dangers, closeness, and whispers under the stars, an unexpected romance emerges that defies the desert and their own fears. Can love blossom in the midst of danger, or will nature prove stronger than their hearts? The wind descended from the north, sharp and dry, cutting through the desert air without encountering obstacles. The light was dim, that of the last hours of the day when the sun had already surrendered its heat and shadows began to stretch across the land. Lali leaned against a cedar post, firmly driven into the hillside, old and cracked on one side, but capable of supporting her weight. Her wrists were tied above her head, the rope biting her skin until her hands went numb from pain. Her ankles were also bound, forcing her to keep her back straight. The cotton dress she once wore in an earth tone was now dust-stained and torn on one side, revealing the line of her thigh and a neckline that showed more than she wished. Her breathing came short, partly from the cold and partly from holding back fear. She had been like this for hours, with sore shoulders, tense calves, and fingers burning from lack of circulation. Every small movement increased the pressure of the rope. Among the dry grass and shrubs, wolves moved silently and cautiously, approaching little by little. Lali could hear the brush of their paws when the wind calmed. They were waiting. They had left her there as punishment, and no one would come to save her. The reason did not matter to those who had tied her. Family grudges, lies told to the wrong men. The truth was not enough to save her. No one from her band would come for her. That certainty settled in her chest like a cold stone, and she decided she would neither cry nor beg. If this was her end, she would face it standing. Far to the south, Rodrigo advanced through a series of low ravines, heading toward the canyon's edge before night fell. He had no defined course, nothing demanding a destination. Years ago, he had worked as a scout for the cavalry, moving ahead of the columns, seeking water and safe passes. It was work for money, nothing more. But it had left him with too many memories of what men could do when no one was watching. After the war, Rodrigo buried his wife, sold what little he had, and began wandering with his horse and only what was essential to survive. Today he rode because moving seemed better than staying in an empty room, thinking of nothing and everything at once. As he traveled through the wastelands, the wind brought a strange sound, long, nearby howls, wolves. Something in the way they overlapped made him stop his horses and pay attention, intuitively recognizing a concentrated danger. He headed north, keeping the rifle loose in the saddle. The line of the cliff appeared before him, and the cedar post stood out against the gray sky. At first, he saw only a thin, upright, motionless silhouette. Then the torn dress caught his attention. The woman's dark hair moved with the wind. He stopped his horse about 100 meters away. The wolves, less than 50 meters off, walked in semicircles, testing the distance they could cover. Rodrigo freed the Winchester, loaded it, and aimed at the ground in front of the nearest wolf. The shot echoed off the cliff, making the animal retreat into the brush. Another approached too closely. Rodrigo loaded a second cartridge and fired at its head. The pack scattered, disappearing into the lowlands. The immediate danger had passed. When everything fell silent, he dismounted with the rifle in hand. His boots creaked on the frozen ground as he scanned the cliff and brush. Close. The woman seemed younger than he had imagined. Her eyes were sharp, measuring the stranger who had saved her. Rodrigo rested the rifle on his shoulder and drew the knife from his belt. He approached close enough to smell the dust and sweat of Lali. Gently, he slid the blade under the rope around her wrists, watching the skin open in red lines as the tension gave way. Her arms fell, and she nearly lost her balance under the weight of her own body. Rodrigo held her firmly, wrapping an arm around her waist to prevent her from falling. The woman was warm despite the cold air around them. She said nothing, but her jaw tensed. As soon as she could stand, she stepped out of his embrace. Rodrigo crouched and cut the rope from her ankles, stepping back to give her space. He took the canteen from the saddle and offered it to her. Lali hesitated for a moment. Then she drank, letting the water run down her chin. He took his coat and placed it over her shoulders. She looked at him for a moment before hugging him, shielding herself from the cold while feeling a safety she had not known for hours. The sound of wolves still echoed in the distance. Rodrigo tilted his head toward his horse, and she understood the signal. Carefully, he lifted her, placed her on the saddle, and mounted behind, his arm ensuring she remained steady as they moved slowly along the cliff. They did not speak. Only the creak of leather, the rhythmic steps of the horse, and the wind slicing through the sage could be heard. Lally did not know the man who had saved her, but for now, safety was enough. The cedar post was left behind, the wolves fading into darkness. Lally's weight pressed more and more against Rodrigo as they rode, and her breathing, first shallow, then deeper, told him everything he needed to know. The question in her eyes was clear. Who was he, and what was he seeking in this desert? When the path descended into a narrow ravine, the wind eased. Rodrigo looked back, finding no trace of wolves or any rider. The post was forgotten. Later, he would deal with the thought of leaving it standing, but night was coming, and there was no reason to risk himself twice in one day. He could handle that later. His low voice barely broke the silence. "Did you hear anything around here?" Lally shook her head, hiding her hands under the coat Rodrigo had given her, hugging him to her chest. The coat was old, buffalo hide, warm and durable. Half a mile later, they reached the mouth of a narrow canyon where a thin line of smoke rose into the cold air. Rodrigo's cabin rested against the rock, its back wall embedded in stone for protection. A small empty corral lay to the left, firewood stacked under a tarp near the door. Rodrigo descended first and held out his hands to help Lally down from the saddle. Her legs trembled as she took the first step, but she managed to stay steady. She breathed slowly, observing everything around her, as if she needed to memorize every corner of that improvised refuge, now her salvation. If you don't want to miss our content, hit the like button and subscribe using the button below. Also, turn on the notification bell and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We appreciate your support. The cabin door creaked open, letting in the scent of burned wood and old leather. Rodrigo carefully placed Lally inside, making sure she didn't trip over the worn rug or the oak table weathered by years. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Lally slowly sat on a bench in front of the warm light, leaning her back against the wall. Her breathing, still heavy, began to calm, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax. Rodrigo closed the door behind him and took off his hat, revealing hair tousled by the wind. His eyes scanned every corner of the cabin, evaluating where to place his rifle, his backpack, and the few belongings that had survived his wandering life. Without a word, he left the canteen on the table and took out a piece of hard bread he had saved for himself. Lally eyed it cautiously, hesitant to take it. He smiled softly, a gesture that conveyed calm and security. Finally, she accepted it and took a small bite, chewing slowly while her hands trembled slightly. Rodrigo sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough for her to feel his constant, protective presence. The wind outside pounded the windows, but inside, the cabin offered a refuge that seemed impossible amid the vast desert. Lally, still wrapped in the coat he had given her, curled up slightly, feeling the texture of the buffalo hide. Rodrigo spoke for the first time in hours, his voice deep and calm. "Are you cold?" She shook her head, but couldn't hide a shiver. He moved a stool closer and placed his boots near the fire, showing that the cabin was a safe, warm space for both of them. As Lally watched the flames, she remembered every detail of what had happened. The wolves, the rope, the sensation of being completely unprotected. But she also recalled the instant relief Rodrigo had given her, his strength and determination to protect her without hesitation. Rodrigo watched her gestures, the way she looked at the fire, how her fingers played with the edges of the coat. The calm radiating from the woman contrasted with the danger she had faced hours before, and something inside him softened as he noticed her vulnerability and trust. The silence became comfortable, almost intimate. Neither of them needed to speak. The mere presence of the other was enough. Lali felt that for the first time in a long while, she could breathe without fear, even though she knew her freedom still depended on this mysterious, steadfast man. Rodrigo stood and walked to the wall, pulling out an old tablecloth he had kept. He placed it on a side table and spread out some blankets. His gaze met Lali's, as if silently saying she could rest without fear of being attacked. Lali finally let her shoulders relax. She slowly removed the coat, letting it fall over the chair, and leaned back against the wall, feeling the warmth of the flames caress her skin. Her heart beat strongly, but a deep relief began to take root. Rodrigo lit an oil lamp on the table, and the yellow light bathed the room. Every shadow it cast seemed to move gently, creating an almost magical effect. Lali watched the reflections and movement of the light on her face, feeling strangely safe. After a moment, Rodrigo sat again, elbows on his knees. He watched her without speaking, aware that any sudden gesture could break the trust that was slowly building. Lali looked at him, noticing the hardness of his features softened by concern. The silence filled with minimal sounds, the crackling fire, the wind beating against the wood, their shared breathing. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sense of warmth and security penetrate every tense muscle in her body. A sensation unknown, yet strangely comforting. Rodrigo, eyes fixed on her, noticed her chest rising and falling with each breath. Something in his way of being, facing dangers, and caring for her without expecting anything in return, sparked a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Finally, Lali opened her eyes and looked at him directly. In that instant, something shifted. A silent understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that they had survived the darkness together. The initial tension gave way to a connection deeper than words. Rodrigo leaned in slightly, carefully, respecting her space. He placed his hand on the table, just brushing hers, and Lali did not withdraw hers. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning, protection, trust, the beginning of an intimacy neither had experienced. The fire's warmth seemed to intensify as they remained still. Lali felt she could trust him, that her life was safe, but also that something more, something deeper, was beginning to awaken between them in the solitude of the cabin. Rodrigo finally broke the silence. "You need to rest. Tomorrow will be another day." Lali nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. The night was long, and the shadows outside could return. But here, inside, in the warm light and Rodrigo's presence, it seemed they could overcome any danger. The old sundial above the fireplace marked the passage of time silently. Rodrigo stood to prepare a place where she could lie down safely while Lali settled in front of the fire, absorbing every detail of that refuge that offered unexpected security. He spread a blanket over the bench and made sure she was warm enough. Lali curled up on it, feeling the softness and heat, her heart still racing from the day's adrenaline, but also with something new, sweet, and unknown. Rodrigo sat nearby, watchful, as if any shadow might return. His eyes scanned the room but kept returning to her. Lali watched him from the corner of her eyes, noting every gesture, every breath, feeling a security she had never imagined in the desert's solitude. The wind slowly eased outside, and a deep silence enveloped the cabin. Rodrigo tilted his head slightly toward her, and Lali, without words, understood that she was not alone, that someone had stopped in the middle of nowhere to care for her, to protect her from the night and the wolves. Their first night together in the cabin arrived with fragile tranquility. Lali closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the blankets and Rodrigo's presence nearby. For the first time since they had left her to the mercy of the wolves, she could sleep without fear, even though the bond that would unite them was only just beginning. Dawn slowly broke over the horizon, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Lali woke before Rodrigo, her eyes still adjusting to the light. The warmth of the fireplace had vanished, but the feeling of safety remained. Rodrigo dozed silently, his chin resting on his arm, his breathing deep and steady. Lali watched him, intrigued by the calm he radiated. A man who could face wolves in the desert, yet whose gentleness emerged only in moments like this. She rose carefully, avoiding waking Rodrigo, and walked toward the window. The desert stretched before her, vast and silent, the dry grass swaying gently in the breeze. A feeling of freedom and fear coexisted in her chest. reminding her how vulnerable she had been. Rodrigo opened his eyes at the movement. Their gazes met, and without words, they communicated the same understanding. A silent bond, a connection born from shared danger and newly discovered trust. The cabin seemed like a world apart. He rose, stretching muscles stiff from the night. His steps were confident, each movement deliberate. Lali watched him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. She had never known someone capable of being so strong, yet so attentive. Rodrigo prepared a simple breakfast, placing bread, jerky, and water on the table. Lali sat across from him, her hands still trembling slightly, not from hunger, but from the mix of emotions stirred by the proximity of this man. As they ate, Rodrigo studied Lali's face, noting each line of tension that softened with every bite. She seemed to struggle to maintain composure, but her eyes spoke for her. Gratitude, relief, and a hint of something deeper, unknown even to her. After eating, Rodrigo gathered his things and looked at Lali with a firm yet gentle expression. "It's time to move," he said, his voice conveying both authority and care. Lali nodded, feeling her heart beat with anticipation and nervousness at the new day. They left the cabin, and the cool morning wind hit their faces. The desert looked different under the golden light, less hostile, more like a canvas on which new stories could be painted. Each step they took together strengthened the trust between them. Rodrigo mounted his horse first, offering Lali the other. Their hands brushed briefly as she took the reins, and both felt a spark travel across their skin. It was a minimal touch, but charged with meaning, a reminder of the closeness they shared. Lali mounted carefully, adjusting to the horse's movement and Rodrigo's pace. The confidence he radiated gave her assurance. Every word of guidance was precise, every protective gesture intentional. She began to understand that she could rely on him without reservation. As they rode, Rodrigo told stories of his youth on the ranch, of dangers he had faced, and difficult choices he had made. Lali listened, fascinated by the mix of toughness and honesty in his tales, and by how each story drew her closer to him. The desert offered breathtaking landscapes, mountains in the distance, rock formations, and an endless sky. Lali could not help but feel small, yet part of something vast and wonderful. Rodrigo, by her side, seemed a guardian capable of facing any danger. They stopped by a dry creek, looking for signs of water or animals. Lali dismounted carefully, exploring the terrain while Rodrigo remained alert, ever watchful. The combination of his strength and care for her increased the admiration and trust she felt. Rodrigo pointed to a spot where the grass was taller and damp. "We could rest there for a while," he said. Lali nodded, recognizing that survival depended on sensible decisions, but also on someone who could read the land and anticipate risks. Sitting at the edge of the creek, Lali lightly touched the dry grass, feeling its rough texture. Rodrigo observed her curiosity, and without a word, tilted his head toward her with a smile, mixing pride and tenderness. Every gesture was a bridge toward intimacy. She finally allowed herself to relax, leaning slightly on the dry moss. Rodrigo's proximity and steady gaze provided a strange sort of comfort, a security she hadn't felt in years, even among her own people. Meanwhile, Rodrigo adjusted his hat and scanned the surroundings. His protective instinct never faded, but he found himself increasingly drawn to the combined fragility and strength of Lali, to her way of enduring and adapting to the wild world around them. The desert's silence allowed them to hear their own thoughts and each other's heartbeats. Each breath, each subtle movement created a shared rhythm that spoke of connection, trust, and a potential bond yet undefined. As they moved on, Rodrigo kept his eyes fixed on Lali, as if anticipating any danger that might arise. She noticed and felt a mix of gratitude and tenderness, giving her the strength to continue trusting, to keep moving with him by her side. During the walk, Rodrigo gathered wild herbs and small fruits so they could eat. Lali helped, quickly learning to identify what was safe. Each joint action strengthened their alliance and created a silent understanding that only extreme life could teach. The afternoon fell, the sky painted in shades of red and purple. They found a small shelter among rocks where they could spend the night. Lali watched as Rodrigo prepared the place, each gesture demonstrating his skill in protecting and caring for someone he did not fully know. The night wind began to blow, and Rodrigo lit a small fire among the rocks. Lali sat nearby, feeling the warmth on her skin. Their eyes met in the flickering light, and a silent understanding arose between them beyond words. They lay down, still alert, but allowing closeness to strengthen trust. Rodrigo shared stories while Lali listened, her fingers occasionally brushing his. Each touch was a reminder of his presence, a contact initiating a deeper, more intimate bond between them. The desert seemed calm, but both knew the peace was temporary. Yet at that moment, nothing else mattered. Only each other's company, the shared security, and the sense that together they could face any threat the wild world posed. The night slowly passed, and Lali closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the rock and Rodrigo's silent protection. Her breathing synchronized with his, and for the first time she allowed her heart to rest, trusting a man who had appeared from nowhere to save her. Dawn arrived with a deep silence, broken only by the distant song of desert birds. Lali woke first, watching Rodrigo scan the surroundings. Every gesture of his was measured, confident, and made her feel protected without words, a silent refuge. Rodrigo turned to her with a tired but warm smile. Lali responded, letting a shy warmth spread through her chest. The closeness was not only physical, but emotional. A bridge built on the trust and vulnerability that survival demanded after a day like this. They mounted their horses and continued their journey, moving among dunes and rocks. Lali began adapting to the rhythm of the desert, learning to read its signs. Rodrigo made sure she did not ride too far ahead, attending to every step and every shared moment. Rodrigo pointed to rock formations where they could find shade. Lali dismounted, stretching her stiff muscles. Their hands brushed as she took the reins, and that brief contact sent a shiver through her, a reminder that they were alone, yet together, in a wild world. While resting, Rodrigo brought out water and shared bread with Lali. Their gazes met, full of gratitude and silent complicity. Each sip and each bite were small rituals that strengthened a growing bond, a tie born of danger, trust, and inevitable closeness. Lali listened as Rodrigo spoke of his past, of distant ranches and lonely nights. Every word revealed his character, his determination, and the tenderness hidden beneath his toughness. She was surprised to feel a mix of admiration and something deeper, a restrained and respectful desire. As they continued their journey, Rodrigo pointed out safe paths and dangerous zones. Lali learned quickly, following his guidance attentively. Each instruction was not just survival, but also a lesson in patience and mutual trust, a silent game of closeness neither could ignore. The sun began to warm the desert, and Rodrigo found a spot with fresh water where they could refresh themselves. Lali dismounted, letting the water run over her hands and face. Rodrigo watched her not only as a protector, but as a man fascinated by her strength and beauty. While resting under a solitary oak, Lali allowed herself to speak of her life before the attack. Rodrigo listened attentively, without interruption, nodding and responding with gentle comments. The connection grew with every word shared, each story revealed in the warmth of mutual trust. Rodrigo taught Lali how to use a knife to cut herbs and small fruits. Their hands touched as he handed her the tool, sending a silent shiver through both. The romantic tension was present, delicate and natural, as if the desert itself conspired to bring them closer. Lali began to trust Rodrigo more, following his pace and decisions. Every gesture of his was guidance, a mix of discipline and care. She realized her heart beat faster in his presence, and a growing feeling began to take hold of her mind. The wind shifted, and Rodrigo adjusted the blankets and provisions with precision. Lali watched, admiring the confidence he radiated. He was a man who could survive any threat, but also had the ability to make her feel safe and valued, a new experience for her. As the sun angled lower, they began riding again. Rodrigo moved slightly ahead, vigilant, while Lali followed with respect and focus. Each mile strengthened the invisible bond between them, a mixture of respect, attraction, and care that grew with every step through the desert. They found a canyon with natural shade, ideal for spending the afternoon. Rodrigo allowed Lali to rest first, keeping a sharp watch over the surroundings. She observed him, fascinated by his ability to combine strength and tenderness, and the sense of protection made her heart race. Rodrigo shared stories of starry nights and lonely camps. Lali sat close, listening carefully, occasionally meeting his gaze. Each story revealed vulnerability and courage, strengthening the nascent intimacy that needed no words to be understood. Twilight enveloped them, painting the sky in reddish and violet hues. Lali shivered when Rodrigo leaned forward to light a campfire. The proximity of his body and the light illuminating his features created an atmosphere charged with silent tension and curiosity. While they ate, their hands brushed again. Neither spoke, but both felt the impact of the contact. It was a secret language, a tacit promise of care and affection. The initial distrust slowly faded, replaced by a feeling neither yet knew how to name. The night grew colder, and Rodrigo adjusted the blankets for both of them. In his eyes, Lali saw a mix of firmness and tenderness that made her feel protected and cherished. Her heart beat strongly, aware of the closeness and intimacy they shared. Rodrigo watched the desert, while Lali leaned back, her thoughts a mixture of gratitude and admiration. Every shadow and every sound reminded them of danger, but also of the trust they had built. Their bond grew silently, yet powerfully, like the strength of the desert itself. Lali finally allowed her mind to rest, resting her head on Rodrigo's knees. He said nothing, simply holding her gently. A simple gesture that spoke of protection, care, and a budding attraction neither could ignore. The starry sky enveloped them as Rodrigo recounted tales of lonely nights. Lali listened, captivated, sensing that every word and gesture built a bridge between them. Intimacy grew slowly, unhurried, as if time itself bent in favor of their connection. The desert wind whispered through the rocks, and Rodrigo adjusted his hat to shield her. Lali smiled, aware of every small gesture, every silent act of care. The romantic tension was present, subtle yet intense, a spark that did not need lighting because it already burned between them. The night advanced, and Lali fell asleep resting against Rodrigo, trusting him completely. Every synchronized breath, every accidental touch, built a bond that transcended mere survival. In the vastness of the desert, two souls found safety, affection, and the beginnings of a love impossible to ignore. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, painting the desert in golden hues. Lali woke to the murmur of the wind, watching Rodrigo adjust the reins of the horses. The daily routine blended with a silent intimacy, a bond that grew with every gesture. Rodrigo pointed to a narrow trail between tall rocks. Lali followed attentively, learning to anticipate the dangers of the terrain. Each shared step strengthened the trust between them, a bond no longer just about survival, but also about understanding and silent attraction. As they crossed a small stream, Rodrigo helped Lali maintain her balance. Their hands brushed, sparking a moment charged with electricity. Neither spoke, but the silence said everything. A connection that went beyond necessity, something much deeper. The desert stretched out before them, vast and lonely. Rodrigo watched the horizons, alert to any threat. Lali observed him, fascinated by his determination and calm in the face of danger. Each shared glance became a secret, silent language, full of contained desire. In a clearing, Rodrigo stopped the horses and brought out provisions. They shared a simple lunch, but every gesture became meaningful. The brush of their hands, the way he handed her the water, everything created an atmosphere of closeness and restrained romantic tension. Lali began recounting stories from her childhood, from before the attack. Rodrigo listened attentively, nodding and offering gentle comments. Intimacy grew with every word shared, each story opening windows into their souls, beyond mere daily survival. As the sun dipped, they continued toward a rocky formation Rodrigo had marked as a refuge. Lali rode behind, holding on carefully as her breath mingled with his. Every shared second reinforced the sense of security and the attraction quietly blooming between them. They found a small oasis where they could refresh themselves. Rodrigo kept watch while Lali drank and washed her face. The mix of strength and tenderness he displayed sent a flutter through her chest, a contained desire the desert seemed to silently accept. While resting under scattered palms, Rodrigo taught Lali to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs. Their hands touched accidentally while he pointed to the leaves. The touch, though brief, caused a shiver, a reminder of the growing romantic tension between them, slow and unhurried. The wind blew softly, carrying sand and dry leaves. Lali moved a little closer to Rodrigo as they watched the horizon. Every gesture of his reflected confidence, but also an affection that was beginning to leave traces in both their hearts. Silent, yet deep, Rodrigo recounted old adventures on distant ranches, facing bandits and lonely nights. Lali listened, awed by his courage and dedication. Fascination mingled with something more intimate, a desire to be near, to share not only danger but also quiet, close moments. As evening fell, the sky turned shades of red and orange. Lali watched as Rodrigo adjusted the campfire and prepared a small, improvised shelter. Each of his movements was meticulous, and she felt a warmth in her chest, admiring his ability to care and protect. While they ate, their hands brushed as they passed utensils. The silent electricity ran through both their bodies, a bond that needed no words. Every accidental touch became an unspoken message. An intimate language only they understood, full of shared attraction and curiosity. The desert fell into shadows, and night advanced. Rodrigo watched the surroundings while Lali sat close, their shoulders almost touching. The physical closeness heightened the romantic tension, a delicate game of attraction neither dared to break, but both felt intensely. Feeling more confident, Lali began speaking of her dreams, of the life she had lost and the one she hoped to rebuild. Rodrigo listened silently, attentively, offering understanding and support. His words were not just comfort, but a bridge drawing their hearts closer. As the moon rose over the desert, Rodrigo lit a small fire. Lali leaned in, letting the warmth illuminate her face and heart. Intimacy grew, a silent bond charged with admiration, tenderness, and desire, built through words, gestures, and glances. The sound of the wind and nocturnal animals accompanied their movements. Rodrigo adjusted Lali's blanket, covering her carefully. The closeness caused a slight shiver, a reminder that the romantic tension was not only mental, but physical, tangible in every brush. Lali rested her head near Rodrigo. He said nothing, simply held her gently. The silent protection, the closeness, and the human warmth created an intimate and safe moment, where fear of the desert vanished, replaced by trust and mutual affection. As Rodrigo watched the starry sky, Lali closed her eyes and sighed. The calm of the moment and his proximity brought a sense of peace and belonging. The nascent attraction and affection mingled with mutual respect and admiration, indestructible. The night wind whispered among the rocks and sand. Lali moved a little closer to Rodrigo, and he did not withdraw his protective arm. Every gesture, no matter how small, increased the intimacy between them, creating a bond neither the desert nor danger could break. Rodrigo told stories of former companions and lonely nights under starry skies. Lali listened, captivated, feeling each word drawing their souls closer. The mixture of strength and vulnerability in him stirred new emotions in her, a desire to share her life and trust fully. The night chill intensified, and Rodrigo carefully covered Lali with the blanket. Their hands brushed as he adjusted it, sending a shiver through both their bodies. The romantic tension was palpable, silent, but undeniable. A flame, both felt without words. Lali fell asleep beside Rodrigo, trusting him as she never had before. Every shared breath, every accidental touch built a deep bond. In the vast desert, two souls found refuge, protection, and the beginning of a love that needed no words to exist. The sunrise broke with golden flashes over the plain. Rodrigo helped Lali mount, and their hands brushed again. Each touch became a secret language, a mixture of tenderness, desire, and respect that grew with every shared step. As they moved through a narrow canyon, Lali admired Rodrigo's skill. He watched every corner, every shadow, protecting her without words. The trust she felt toward him transformed into deep affection, a care she could no longer deny or hide. The sound of a nearby river drew them in. Rodrigo dismounted with agility and offered his hand to Lali. She took it without hesitation, feeling a warmth that came not just from the sun, but from the silent, growing bond between them. They stopped to refresh themselves in the clear stream. Rodrigo helped Lali wash her face, and the physical closeness provoked a mix of calm and desire. Every gesture was careful, intimate, and the silence between them was charged with contained emotion. While resting under a tree, Lali spoke of her family and her village. Rodrigo listened attentively, offering gentle comments and gestures of understanding. Every shared word tightened their connection. A bridge between two different worlds, now united by experience and mutual affection. The afternoon approached, and they needed to continue toward the rocky hills. Lali rode behind Rodrigo, trusting his guidance. Every movement of his inspired admiration and security, while the silent attraction grew more intense with each kilometer they traveled together. In a clearing, Rodrigo prepared the meal, while Lali gathered some nearby herbs. Their hands brushed accidentally and repeatedly, each touch sparking a silent reminder that something deeper was growing between them, beyond mere survival. The wind carried the scents of earth and vegetation. Lali moved a little closer, leaning on Rodrigo as he scanned the surroundings. The physical closeness and mutual trust fed the romantic tension neither dared to break. Rodrigo shared stories of old companions and solitary adventures. Lali listened, fascinated, feeling that each tale drew their souls closer. The combination of strength and vulnerability in him stirred new emotions, a desire to share more than the journey, her life, her secrets, her heart. As the sun began to set behind the hills, Rodrigo and Lali sought temporary shelter. They built a fire and sat close, enjoying the warmth. The physical closeness caused a tingling in both of them, a silent reminder of the intimate connection growing with every shared moment. While eating, their hands brushed as they passed the utensils. The silent electricity ran through their bodies, a bond that needed no words. Every gesture, every glance reinforced the intimacy, a romantic bond arising amid the desert and the constant danger surrounding them. Night advanced, and the sky filled with stars. Rodrigo covered Lali with a blanket, and their hands touched again. The touch caused a silent shiver, a reminder that the romantic tension and attraction were inevitable and irreversible. Lali rested her head on Rodrigo's shoulder as they watched the fire. The warmth of the shelter, his closeness, and the desert's silence created a moment of peace and intimacy, a shared breath amid the journey and constant challenges. Rodrigo told her about his life before the desert, his losses, and what had led him to become a solitary man. Lali listened, fascinated, understanding his scars, and the admiration she felt for him mingled with deep, silent affection. The night wind moved the branches and sand. Lali settled closer, trusting him completely. Every gesture of protection and care increased the silent intimacy between them. A romantic bond grew without words, only through glances and the subtle brushing of hands. As the moon illuminated the desert, Rodrigo and Lali shared a moment of tranquility, gazing at the stars. The beauty of the sky and their mutual company intensified the romantic tension, and contained longing transformed into silent, close affection. Lali began sharing dreams and desires she had never voiced before. Rodrigo listened attentively, offering gestures of understanding and support. Every word strengthened their connection, and the desire to protect and care for each other mingled with a silent, deep romance that they both felt. The night's cold intensified, and Rodrigo adjusted the blanket over Lali. Their hands brushed again, sending a shiver that spoke of something beyond friendship. The physical and emotional closeness created a deep bond, a romance arising without the need for words. While resting, Lali felt safe and protected. Her trust in Rodrigo transformed into affection, and the romantic attraction became impossible to ignore. Every gesture, every shared glance, built a silent bridge between their hearts, uniting their destiny in the middle of the desert. Rodrigo watched the fire and the night sky while Lali slept nearby. The desert surrounded them, but their bond kept them safe and connected. Every shared breath, every accidental touch, strengthened the budding relationship. A silent, yet unstoppable romance felt in every gesture. The sunrise promised a new day full of challenges. Rodrigo woke first, watching Lali carefully. His gaze was full of affection and determination, a silent commitment to protect her. Not just for survival, but because his heart was already irrevocably bound to hers. Lali woke feeling Rodrigo's closeness. A shared moment of silence conveyed more than words: trust, protection, and deep affection. Every movement of his showed care and consideration, and the attraction between them became impossible to ignore, intense and silent. As they moved toward the mountains, Rodrigo and Lali exchanged glances and gestures of complicity. The romantic connection that had arisen grew with each step, through adventures and challenges. The silent intimacy transformed into a force that kept them united beyond the constant danger. The landscape changed, and the wind brought scents of earth and wildflowers. Lali rested her hand on Rodrigo's arm as they walked, a brief but intentional contact. It was a reminder that the attraction and affection they shared could no longer be hidden. Night approached again, and Rodrigo found a small refuge among rocks. They built a fire and sat together, sharing warmth and glances. The silent romance consolidated in every gesture, every touch, every shared breath in the lonely desert. Rodrigo offered his coat to Lali and covered her carefully. Their hands brushed as he adjusted the fabric, sending a silent shiver through their bodies. The physical and emotional closeness demonstrated that their romantic bond had grown strong, inevitable, and deep. The starry sky watched over their improvised refuge. Lali and Rodrigo shared the desert's silence and calm. Their hearts beating close, every moment, every gesture of care, reinforced a silent romance, a bond of affection and desire that neither loneliness nor danger could break. The sunrise bathed the peaks in gold. Lali and Rodrigo moved cautiously toward the valley, aware that danger lurked. Yet the closeness and trust they shared turned every step into a moment of silent tenderness. Rodrigo helped Lali cross a turbulent river, his arm firm around her waist. Each touch sparked silent electricity, a reminder that their bond was stronger than any fear. The romantic connection was felt in every protective gesture. In the distance, they heard the howl of wolves. Rodrigo tensed, and Lali held on to him with confidence. The tension was palpable, but their mutual affection sustained them, combining courage, instinct, and the certainty that they would face any threat together. In a clearing, Rodrigo scanned the horizon. Lali stayed close, resting her hand on his. The silent contact strengthened their complicity as their hearts beat in unison. No obstacle seemed too great when they shared that mixture of desire and deep care. They hid among bushes when they heard distant footsteps. Rodrigo whispered instructions, and Lali obeyed with complete trust. Every silent movement reinforced their bond, a dance of survival intertwined with the intimacy and romance that had blossomed during their journey. Finally, they reached a small cave where they could rest. Rodrigo lit a fire, and Lali sat nearby, letting the warmth envelop her. Their hands brushed accidentally, sending a shared shiver, a reminder of the silent attraction that united them. While eating, they shared stories of their childhoods. Lali spoke of her village and dreams. Rodrigo spoke of his losses and solitary journeys. Each tale tightened their bond, and the silent intimacy grew more intense, a romance consolidating without words. Night fell, and the sky filled with stars. Rodrigo covered Lali with his blanket, drawing her close. Their breaths synchronized, and the physical closeness nourished deep affection, a romantic bond born from adversity and mutual trust. Lali rested her head on his shoulder, feeling Rodrigo's strength and constant care. The shared silence was comforting, full of understanding and affection. Their hearts beat in harmony, and the romantic attraction became impossible to ignore. At dawn, Rodrigo watched Lali sleep. His expression reflected concern and tenderness. Every moment together had solidified a bond that surpassed danger. Their relationship was no longer just survival. It was a silent love, born from closeness, trust, and the challenges they faced together. They left the cave and resumed their path toward the village. Each step strengthened their complicity. Lali felt protected and understood, while Rodrigo experienced an affection he had never felt before. The mixture of romance and adventure kept them united against any adversity. In a clearing, Rodrigo shared stories of lost loves. Lali listened, fascinated, sensing the vulnerability in his voice. Each word built a bridge between their hearts, and the romantic attraction grew more intense, blending tenderness, desire, and mutual respect. The wind stirred the tall grass as they advanced. Lali moved closer to Rodrigo, seeking security and comfort. The contact was brief, but enough to ignite a silent feeling of intimacy and romance, consolidating a bond born from risk and constant closeness. They encountered a narrow, rocky path. Rodrigo helped Lali maintain her balance, their hands touching repeatedly. Each brush sent a shiver that spoke of care, desire, and silent attraction, impossible to ignore amid the journey and constant danger. The sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in reddish hues. Lali and Rodrigo rested under a tree, exchanging subtle glances and gestures. The romantic tension grew palpable, and the silent intimacy strengthened their bond with every shared moment. While resting, Rodrigo spoke of his uncertain future and the importance of Lali in his life. She listened attentively, understanding the depth of his affection. Their hands intertwined, sealing a silent pact of protection, care, and emerging love. As night fell, they set up an improvised camp. Rodrigo lit the fire, and Lali settled nearby. The physical and emotional closeness generated a unique warmth, a silent romance growing with every gesture, every glance, and every accidental touch between them. Lali shared a secret from her childhood, and Rodrigo listened attentively, offering soft words of comfort and understanding. Every conversation strengthened their bond, blending mutual trust and affection with the romantic attraction they felt in every shared moment. The night sky was full of stars. Rodrigo adjusted the blanket over Lali and held her gently. Their breaths synchronized, and their hearts beat as one, sealing a silent and deep romance born from survival and shared closeness. At dawn, they resumed their march toward the safety of the village. Every step together was a silent promise, a union that overcame any fear. The romantic attraction and mutual trust had solidified, becoming an unbreakable bond that would accompany them beyond the desert. They reached a stream where Lali washed her face, while Rodrigo watched her with care and tenderness. The silent affection and romantic attraction were evident, a bond that could no longer be denied, born of closeness, adventure, and constant mutual care. In a clearing, Rodrigo shared memories of his solitary childhood, and Lali responded with stories of her village. The emotional intimacy blended with romantic attraction, creating a bridge between their hearts that overcame any challenge of the desert or the solitude that had accompanied them. As they moved toward the village, sunlight illuminated their faces. Lali moved closer to Rodrigo, resting her hand on his arm. The gesture was simple but full of meaning, affection, trust, and a silent romance that both felt growing with every shared moment. They finally reached the outskirts of the village. Rodrigo protected Lali as they crossed the last kilometers. The adventure had strengthened their bond, and the romantic intimacy had transformed into silent love. A deep bond born of survival, closeness, and mutual trust. Upon reaching a safe refuge, Rodrigo and Lali shared a moment of tranquility. Their hands intertwined, and their gazes spoke louder than any words. The journey had united them forever, and the silent romance that had begun in the desert was now unbreakable. As night fell, Rodrigo and Lali sat before the fire, sharing warmth and glances. The romantic attraction, tenderness, and mutual trust consolidated, uniting their destinies. The desert had tested their strength, but their love had emerged stronger and deeper than ever.